Hello everyone, I'm so happy to have you here with me. Today I'm going to take you through a beginner tutorial where we're going to paint an afternoon beach scene. I'm drawing inspiration for this scene from a photo that I took when I was walking with a friend down at the beach the other day, and the colors from the sunset were just amazing. Pinks and oranges and purples, and it just got better and better. And the one we're going to be painting today is the calm water in the bay as it's hit that real dusk part of the afternoon. So the colors that we're going to use today are some yellow ochre, some burnt sienna, phthalo blue, permanent rose, or you can also use a crimson, some hooker's green for some of the grassy elements on the sand dunes, and some Payne's grey for bringing in any of those shadows. The great thing about watercolors is you only need a really small amount of whatever color you're using, so colors often go a really long way. For this piece, I'm going to use a small, a medium, and a semi-large brush, or this is a number 4 from the Montmartre series. I have a number 1 and then a medium round brush. First thing we're going to do is our sky. So I'm going to take some painter's tape. The paper that I'm using for this piece is the Arches Rough 300 GSM. I really love using rough or cold pressed paper doing watercolor because it gives you that nice texture when you put the colors down that is that real signature watercolor style. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is wet our brush. And we are going to fully wet this top section for the sky. We don't want it to be dripping, but we do want the whole section to be quite damp so that our sunset colors are going to spread really beautifully. So in this picture, the colors are blending from blue in the very top down to yellow into a deep pink, and there are a few clouds on the horizon where we get a deep blue again. Now I'm not too worried if it doesn't stay completely true to the picture. I would say one of the hardest things to learn about watercolor, or even just about art in general, is being able to let go of the idea in your head of what you want it to look like and just allow yourself to go with the way that the painting is going and what the colors are doing. As soon as we put that color on paper, we don't have full control, and that's okay. That's part of the fun, that's part of the creativity. So I'm going to lightly wet my brush. I'm going to take some blue, just a very, very small amount to start with. I'm just going to paint it in that top corner. Take a little bit more and just add it to the very top. Just letting it blend. I'm going to wash my brush lightly. And I'm going to take some of that yellow ochre. And just under the blue, not quite touching it because it'll bleed up into it, but I'm just going to do a line of yellow over here. You can see it's very translucent right now. We're going to keep loading paint gently so that we don't go overboard. We just gently add until we get a colour that we're happy with. And you can just allow those two colours to blend together on the paper naturally. If you want, you can add some more blue into the top. Try and keep your brush strokes all going in the same direction, except for the sky. Try not to paint up and down, but paint across, because it'll give you the nicer lines that we want for the sky, for the changing gradient. While those colours continue to settle themselves onto the paper, the next colour I'm going to take is that permanent rose. You can take crimson or pink or red. And take a little bit of that. Gently paint that underneath our yellow. You see how those colours blend up, almost making an orange with the yellow and the red just on their own, taking on a mind of their own. Starting to form those beautiful sunset feels now. And the last colour I'm going to take for our horizon is some of that blue again. I'm going to paint down along the tape line here. We may add in a bit more of that red again. You'll notice what happens when I lift my brush too soon and it leaves a mark. You want to continue your stroke all the way across the page. I'm going to add in some more of that rose colour now. I love these sunsets in winter. And while our paper is still wet there, you continue to add colours and play and move things around. Watercolour is quite malleable in that way, especially if you're using a good quality paper. There is a lot of room to move, make changes, keep adding, because as the colours blend together, it may change from what it originally was looking like on the paper. So I'm going to add back in some of that yellow at the top. And now I'm going to set my brush down and just let the colours go where they want as the paper dries. In the sky area as well, there's a bit of a landmass we're going to paint along this side and the hint of one over here, so we'll wait for this to dry completely so that we can get some hard edges on the landmass. If you want your artwork to dry faster so you can get things moving, you can use a hairdryer, just on a low setting, not too close, and that'll help speed things along so you continue on with your painting. Okay, now our sky is completely dry. We are going to paint in a little mass of land on the horizon. For this, I'm going to mix together a small amount of the phthalo blue with the Payne's grey, just to get a more muted blue. And we're going to make our mass of land look like it's way out in the distance. Just taking a small amount of paint, I'm going to use a smaller brush. And I'm just going to start my mountain. Put some rises and falls in it. You can make yours look however you like. It can be tall, it can be very small. There are no rules on my free painting landscapes. There are no rules. Okay, I'm going to add a bit more paint back in, just loosely, so it's not all solid colour. That'll give some lights and shadows in our landmass. I'm going to do a small one on the other side as well, just to add some interest to the left side of the painting. Okay, I'm going to leave it simple like that. Now we're going to leave that to dry for a moment, and then we can lift our tape and start working on the second half of the painting. Really gently making sure the paint's fully dry. You can peel away that dividing layer of tape, and you can see we have our beautiful horizon line. So for the second half of the painting, we're going to use a very similar technique as the sky. We're going to reverse the colours and use that same wet on wet blending technique to do the water. I have some darning lines here where I've very gently drawn my bay with a little bit of land coming out here. Just going to make those a little bit darker. And then my water comes around here to the shore. We also have a couple of dunes just here. Now for this next part, even though our sky is dry, we're going to add water to the water section of the painting using the same technique as the sky, but we want to be really careful not to let the water go over that line and bleed up into our sky, because it's going to mess up our little islands and the colours that we have going there. So I'm going to wet my brush, start adding a bit of water just like we did before within the confines of where I've outlined my shorelines. I just want everything to be a little bit damp. Again, we don't want it to be completely drenched, just enough so if you hold your paper on an angle, you can see that it's shiny and covered in water. I'm actually going to leave a very small gap between my water and my sky because I can always just paint that in with a smaller brush when we get to that part. I don't want to ruin what I've already done by going too far. Okay, so once that is all damp, I'm going to start loading up my colours. So I'm going to start with a very, very faint blue, just like we did in the sky. And I'm going to paint that out on the horizon. And you'll notice where you've painted the water, where the paper is wet, that is where your paint will stop. As it's blending out, you can see my colour, it's not going any further than where I've wet the paper. So that's another great way where you can control where your colour goes. So start with wet paper. And then the colours won't go past that point. So I'm taking my smaller brush, I'm going to load with that same colour, and I'm going to gently paint up closer to our horizon line. We may come back in later and refine that horizon even further. For now, we are going to continue to focus on our first layer of colours. So I'm going to move on now to our red, crimson, rose, whichever colour you chose. I'm going to gently add this in. Dragging my stroke from the tape and as far across as I can to the other side to the tape again, to keep those nice smooth lines. Always rinsing my brush in between colours. I'm using some paper towel just to dab some of that water out, depending on the brush you use. Some brushes hold a lot more water than others, and you don't want too much water to be added when you add colour, since we've already wet our paper. Now I'm going to add in some of that yellow ochre. I'm going to hope for that same effect of the rose. Blends into the yellow and gives us some of that beautiful orange sunset glow. And the final colour, we're going to go back to our starting blue and bring it right in to the beach. If you want to blend your colours more, you can clean the brush, dry it slightly in your paper towel, and just bring the empty brush in and just run it between your two colours. And that will help blend. It will also help take colours away if you feel it's too pigmented, because the dry brush will soak up those colours for you. We're going to leave it there for just a moment. Let it dry ever so slightly, not completely dry. We want it just to be damp so our colours don't spread too much. We're going to add some ripples. We're going to add some fine lines just to show the water is still lapping towards the beach. While that's drying, I'm going to take my number 1 brush and I'm just going to work this horizon a bit more. So let's grab some more of that blue, maybe some Payne's grey as well, just to mute that colour a little bit. It's a very pigmented blue. Take a little bit on the brush. I'm going to work this horizon a little bit more. Add some depth. And while the paint is still a little bit wet, you can see it just blends away beautifully. You don't have to do too much. Just adding some darkness in here. I'm just cleaning my brush, just running some water to finish off that blending. I'm not looking for it to be too perfect. The water and the paper and the paint are going to do what they're going to do. It is watercolour after all. If you find you're unhappy with something, the way the water is protruding down, I'm just going to add some rose back into that and blend it back up and away. And it's going to move and change as it dries. Now I think it may be dry enough now. I'll use my small brush again. You could probably use a small or a medium brush for this. I'm going to just start experimenting with some ripples in the water. So I'm going to take the same colour I just used with a bit of water on the brush. I just want a really small amount of colour to start with. Just a very small amount of colour. We're going to come in. I'm just going to try a little ripple over here, starting off on the tape. Now we're going to see how the paint responds. If it blurs out immediately too fast and doesn't keep that line, we probably want to wait for the paper to dry a bit more. But I think for the look I'm going for, this is going to be okay. I'm just going to gently, a little bit more paint, a little bit more water. I'm just going to repeat that a few times. And if you can, try and let the lines get smaller and smaller as you get further and further away. We're going to just put our brush down, let that dry a little bit, and then we'll continue on with the sand on the beach. We are back with dry paper and clean water, and for this next part we are going to start with the light color of the sand. So with watercolor you always want to be going light, layering on the dark. So we're going to start with the lightest color that we want the sand to be, and to get this color I'm going to add Payne's Grey to some yellow ochre just to get a more muted yellow, because I'm going for that real Australian Sunshine Coast white coloured sand. I'm going to mix these two colours together gently. And then I'm going to use mainly water with just a little bit of pigment. So rather than using white to make the color lighter like you would in acrylic or oil painting, with watercolor, the more water that you add, the more translucent the color is going to be. So that's how we get our pale colors. And then by adding more pigment, we get our darker colors. So I'm going to just start by wetting the paper again, as we did before. I'm just going to wet the whole thing, and then we're going to put this base color down. Then we'll come in with our details, and we'll also come in with our greenery for some of the grass on the dunes. We'll have some trees and shrubs that were around on the beach. Gonna lightly wet paper just as before, being careful not to go over the lines of the water that we've already created. I won't worry too much about this little sandbar here. We'll
come in and paint that a little later, and we're going to also add a bit of green on there. Once you've got an even amount of water on your paper, you can start adding in some of your colour. So sometimes I like to have a little test piece of paper next to me just to see how the colour is going to come out, if I've loaded my brush too much before I actually put it on my painting. So I'm pretty happy with that colour, so I'm just going to gently brush that all over my painting, making sure I'm using lots of water, keep it nice and translucent. If you want to add more colour, you always can do that. It's much easier to add than it is to take away. With any watercolour painting, I like to start lighter than I think I will need, because I can always add in more, but if I've gone too dark, it's really hard to correct that and take that colour away. So if you can see here, if it's not too faint, I've drawn out 2 sand dunes. So we're going to add a bit of shadow in there as soon as our paint starts to dry a little bit. We're also going to add in the dappled effect, as if the sand has been walked on by many people who enjoyed the beach that day. So you can put your brush down for a moment, just let it dry, or get your hairdryer out a little bit. We don't want to dry it too much. We still want to have that maneuverability with the wet on wet technique to get some of these lights and darks. So while that's drying, I'm just gonna mix a little bit more of my paint colours. Now I'm just gonna test how dry the paper is. I'm just going to add in a little bit of dark here. You can see it's still quite wet. It's really not holding its form at all. So I'm gonna lay that down there, but then I'm going to step away, allow the paint to dry. And if it has gone somewhere you don't want it, you can always dry your brush and lift the paint away there. So we'll let it dry a little bit longer, and then we will be back to do our shadows. Okay, now our paper is a bit drier. We can come back in with some shadows. So we're just going to use a deeper hue of our yellow ochre and Payne's grey. We're going to put some shadows on the back of the sand dune, coming into the trail down here. And we're going to start doing a kind of dappled effect on the sand to make it look kind of like footsteps, like people have been walking on it all day. We're just going to gently dot our paint around, be as loose as you like. We're just going to let the paint take control of this one. If you want, you can use a smaller brush as we get further away. I'm just going to gently dot and let the sand have a life of its own. I'm not worrying too much about these sand dunes because we're going to put some grass on the top there. I'll have a patch of sand here. It'll mostly be a grassy dune. We're going to put the brush down, leave that to dry for a bit, or feel free to get out your hairdryer again. The next detail we are going to do is this edging of where the shore meets the sand. So the water is just really gently lapping at the sand. So we're going to just grab some more of that yellow ochre and Payne's grey, and we're just going to put a shadow on the edge so it looks as if the sand is wet, where the tiny waves are just coming onto the sand. And as the painting gets further and further away, the distance of the objects get further away, we want to just make the strokes smaller to give it the illusion that it's moving into the distance. This might mean coming back in to paint this over this section a couple of times just to get the look that you're happy with. Again, there is no right and wrong. Your shoreline can look however you like it to look. If you're unhappy with something, you can clean the brush, dry it a little bit, and blend away what you've done. If you do find yourself doing this, don't go back in straight away to redo the colour you've done, because you'll find the paper's been newly made wet. The paper's newly wet here, so the paint might run back to where you've just removed it from. So just leave it to dry a few moments, and then you can come back in, redo anything you weren't happy with or removed. I'm still not too worried about this section here. From my photo, it's mainly all greenery. So I will just with this tiny brush, go in and put a line of sand, but we are going to go over back in there and put some greenery and grass on there. If you want to continue adding some shadows at this point as the paper continues to dry, but it is still a little bit damp. So I'm going to come back in and add more shadows at the back of the dune here. I can add some more mottled effect to this section down here with a tiny brush. Just watch how it blends away into the still damp paper. Just gonna add some little marks in here, make that sand even less perfect. The more details, the better. Just making the back of this sand dune a bit darker. Still leaving this part blank, because that will mainly be our greenery. Okay, I'm going to put my brush down again, let it dry a little. Now, we're going to move on to one of the last sections of the painting, which is adding the greenery to the sand dunes. So, I'm going to get some of my Hooker's Green.
and some of my yellow ochre. And just like we did before with the yellow and the Payne's grey, I'm going to mix a little bit of my green and my yellow. And we're going to use a couple of different colours for our greenery. So to start with, we are going to do a little bit of grass on these sand dunes. So I'm just going to get a little bit of paint. I'm going to do a little test. Make sure I'm happy with the colour. And then I'm going to come in and just start doing some really tiny, tiny strokes. Just want to go up and down along the top of the sand dune just to outline the shape of it. Using the lightest colour first, so our green mixed with yellow. And then we'll come in with our deeper green to add some depth. Add a little bit down the front here on the sand. Then we're going to come over to this other sand dune. We're going to do the same. We're going to leave some space here for a bit of a tree. We're going to start our grass just along the top. I've got this line drawn here. Keep the brush relatively loaded with paint. We'll just do little movements all the way across till we get to our shadow. Adding more water, mixing more of that paint where you need. I'm not too worried about getting the colour exact again. Slight variation in colours, just add more to the depth, adds more to the uniqueness of your painting. We're going to also leave some space so the whole thing is not going to be covered in grass. We'll have bits of sand poking through, and we'll use more of our darker green over the back here where the shadow is. And we'll just do a little extra bit of grass just up here, just really little tiny strokes. Almost just dots at this point. Okay, now we'll start to move in with more of our darker green, add in some shadows. add some of the green underneath and at the back of the lighter brush strokes, you'll really start to add the depth, the lights and darks. Now at this stage of the painting, you can add as much or as little grass as you like. Completely up to you with whatever look you're going for. Add some of my darks over the back of the sand dune. Now I'm going to bring some green, some deep green up into this section up here. Okay, now we're going to take a slightly larger brush we're going to get some of that lighter green going. And we're going to start to form a bit of bushes, a bit of trees over in this area. So we're just going to lightly dab in our tree. Really loose for now, and then the same on this side. Just going to dab, get the shape, the outline of the top of the tree. You can bring your shrubbery out as far as you like. And this is just the first layer. We're going to do the same thing as before with the grass and add in our darks as we go.
once you've got the shape of your bushes down, you can come in and with the smaller brush, we can get some burnt sienna, raw umber, some brown. Maybe we mix some Payne's Grey with the burnt sienna. We'll get a darker brown, and we'll just paint some twigs, some sticks and twigs to fill out our trees a little bit. Be careful doing this while the paint is too wet. It can give you a nice effect where it blends together, but if you're wanting those more refined strokes, you may want to wait for the paint to dry a little bit more. I don't mind if my brown leaks a little bit into my leaves. And give us that really classic watercolor effect. The colours blending together. While this side is still wet, I'm just going to go back in, add a little bit deeper green. Great thing about watercolor is you can mix colors on the paper. You can add, they will blend while they're still wet. Now we're almost done. There's just a few finishing touches that I'd like to add, a few extra details to just give this piece a little bit more character. And so now looking at it, seeing what seems to be missing, I'm just looking at this section here. I think it needs to be in a bit more shadow. It needs to be a little bit darker. Along the edge here. So I can add in some colour, I can add in some water to just blend it away. What do you say we add some clouds just close to the horizon? So I'm going to continue using this little brush, make sure it's clean. I'm going to go back and get some of our blue that we used in the beginning. I'm just going to really gently load the brush. I just want a very faint colour, and I'm just going to paint a few wispy clouds just like this on the horizon. Very gently, some clouds over the mountain.
If you find your clouds are too dark, clean your brush, have it just damp. You can take some of that pigment away. You can blend it a little bit more into the sky by just going over it with a clean, damp brush. Next, I think I'm going to add in a few more darks just in the front of our shrubbery here. Adding some Payne's Grey into our Hooker's Green. Got a really deep, dark green going. I'm just going to dab some lowlights into this bottom area. Adding some extra depth underneath the leaves. I'm going to add a couple of people standing out looking at the water. I'm going to get my Payne's Grey and I'm just going to paint two very tiny figures. Anywhere in the painting that doesn't quite look like the colours are right, it doesn't look balanced, it needs any more detail, you can go in and add those things in. And finally, I'm going to define a couple of these ripples a little bit more, just to bring a bit more detail into the piece. If you find your lines are too thick, you can use some water and a dry brush to work away the harsh line, blend it away, you can thin it out. Brushes down, I think this piece is finished.
We'll let it dry for a few minutes and then we can pull the tape off.